And we are back from another quick hiatus to the Integrative Answers to Cancer podcast. And again, after losing my day job, we wanted to make sure that we could make a sustainable operation out of all of this, getting some projects off the ground, most notably the Toxic Home Transformation Summit, which was a huge success. We had over 100,000 people sign up to watch it, and it really did a whole lot of good, not only in making the world a healthier place, but really to plant our flag in the non-toxic living space, in addition to the reversing cancer space, which is awesome because for us, it's all one and the same. It's always been that way. You can't really reverse something unless you've actually removed the cause in the first place. Or if you're listening to this show as someone who wants to prevent cancer, then it should be pretty obvious as well that, surrounding yourself with causes to cancer probably isn't the best idea there either. So we are excited to take that ball and run with it, and you can expect to see a lot more on how we live clean and non-toxically on the Stern Method YouTube channel and website. And if you didn't catch the free airing of the Toxic Home Transformation, on that note, you can always buy the talks for a very low price, considering the sheer amount of information that's in there at thetoxichometransformation.com, same as it was to watch it. Anyway, here we are after this latest pause to the show, and not to bore you with too many details, but we ran into some further last-minute kinks in finishing our non-toxic house that we've been building, where I'm actually recording this outside, by the way, so forgive any birds or wind or that sort of thing, but we've been bouncing around between temporary living situations and working out of libraries and all this stuff, and it just did not equate to putting out new podcast episodes or much content at all, for that matter, in combination with some things we needed to do immediately post-summit. But we're coming into a very good place now and really looking forward to resuming regular programming. And on that note, are actually putting together a little update video if you do want more details on what we've been up to and what we've been going through and all that sort of thing that you can find on the Stern Method YouTube channel. As it relates directly to this podcast and everything we do online, the other thing that's happened to us, which I believe I did mention in the intro to the last episode, was our son Ryder's own MRI not going exactly the way we wanted it to. He's got a remaining mass inside of and around his spine that everyone was pretty well convinced was just scar tissue at this point, but a portion on the outside of his spine had grown a bit over the past year since his last scan. So with that, everything we've done online has been a result of our son being diagnosed with cancer and us documenting what we learned along the way for the benefit of others. But with this last MRI, all of that is getting taken to the next level. So a lot of what you see and hear us do is going to be directly recording conversations we're having or actions we're taking pertaining to Ryder's healing. As that relates to this podcast specifically, you're going to hear a lot of conversations and consultations with naturopathic doctors and healers of all kinds, in addition to the more classical style of interviews you're used to hearing. But that conversation or consultation is what we have on this episode here today. Dr. Paul Anderson makes his third appearance on the show right after being the second-time guest ever, but this time it's in a more consultative role, picking up where he left off as Ryder's first, original, and I might add best, naturopathic oncologist. So, this was a call I recorded with him, which was right after we got the MRI, and we were still waiting to take an HVA-MVA test, which would give us more data on whether this was a full-blown reactivation of neuroblastoma or if the growth was due to more mature cells that wouldn't necessarily be considered malignant, but are still alive and growing all the same. We have, since that time, gotten those results back, and I think the best thing to do for context and to talk about where we go from here and all that will be to let you listen to the call now, and then I will be back to talk about what the results were on the other side of it. So, with that being said, I know you'll get a lot of great insight from here on healing cancer through our own family's journey, and specifically right now out of this call with Dr. Anderson. And again, I will see you on the other side to talk about the results and where we go from here. I don't know if you saw the post, but really, we went in to get his MRI, and the result was that basically everything inside of his actual spinal canal is unchanged, because the whole thing has been kind of woven in and out from the start. and the outer part was a couple of years ago, it started, ticking up just a little bit and getting sort of fuller in appearance and whatnot. And that's when we kind of just, we thought we were in the clear then, and just doubled down on everything and then just stopped it at that point. But now it's kind of the same thing where, it's like just the part that's coming out of the spine on the outside, it grew, at least, there's a few parts, but the one part grew like, close to a full centimeter, which it's hard. It's not like a perfect circle or anything, so it's kind of hard to measure. But if you had to measure it, that's about what it would be, that sort of thing. And it definitely just like looks fuller. So the oncologists at this point, we're going to do the HVA VMA test, but we had, found in the past that, which, is the markers for neuroblastoma secretion. But yeah, we found in the past that the vitamin C and some other supplements kind of artificially spiked it. So we figured it was best to wait on that. So we're, holding off on most stuff until Monday, Tuesday, and then we'll, get that test. But, he's kind of 50-50 or even more, to where if he had to put money on it, he would say it was a ganglioneuroma, which would be mature cells that are still kind of smoldering or whatever, versus active neuroblastoma. So, that being said, I just, like, right now, obviously we're going to double, just re-up everything as far as anti-cancer, anti-specific neuroblastoma stuff that I'd found research on, that sort of thing. As far as like supplements were concerned, probably, maybe I've always wanted an ozone machine. Might as well just, get one of those. That sort of thing. And then I'll probably, we haven't done like a full-blown genetics, assessment at this point, and, gotten that data and consulted with people on it and figured out what to do from that standpoint. I'll probably do that. Like we talked about last time, we'll probably get a thorough detoxification program going for him, because he needs that. Maybe even get some energy work going, which I've always wanted to do. And then aside from that, like, my big quandary right now, like, is if it is the, the mature cells, the ganglioneuroma, instead of active cancer, like the oncologist is saying that he wouldn't even think that chemo would do much for it, because it is, a slow growing, either he wouldn't even be able to say whether it's just those cells themselves getting bigger, or if they are multiplying, but just at a very slow rate. Either way, it's not something the chemo would necessarily target.
Right.
He had thrown out that maybe, maybe Accutane might do something, the retinoic acid, because I don't know, because obviously it's something that gets prescribed for neuroblastoma, and that he thinks it might have some sort of an effect on ganglioneuroma as well. But that's kind of where it's at. We're going to get the HVMA, or the HVA VMA. But then I also saw something that they also use HVA VMA to test for ganglioneuroma as well. So now I'm kind of confused on that. But it's like, I guess that's my big thing, is like, kind of everything I just listed off there is stuff I plan on doing one way or the other. But then if it is the, the ganglioneuroma versus neuroblastoma, I guess I'm kind of at a quandary of like what to do on the non-conventional side. And so that's,
I mean, and I think most of the base things that you would do, it wouldn't matter which thing it was. The ganglioneuroma, of course, would be the better the better answer if that's what it is. And yeah, I would definitely agree. If you're going to go do the VMA test, just make sure he's clear of everything that could interfere. And there's like 100 things that interfere with those tests, so it's really easy to throw those off. So I would take him off like everything, and for
and
a couple of days,
It's unfortunate because all the stuff we talked about last time to detox him from, or keep that stuff moving, keep the sedation moving through, or like the exact things that spike it. But I figured the information is more important than whatever extra detox he has to get on the backside. So
and I think for a few days, especially him being young with young kidneys and everything, a few days off the detox stuff, that's not going to be a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really probably fine. And you can start right back after the test. So when they do that, are they doing 24 hours worth of urine, or just the morning
collection?
Okay. All right.
Probably best to do that in the morning before he's even eating anything.
Basically that's going to be probably the best representation. And then in case he ate something that had some interference, you'd cut that out too. So I guess we can go backwards in order. Let's say it's a ganglioneuroma. You've got these benign cells that are replicating, and they're from the embryonic part of the crest, where his spinal cord forms and all that. And so a lot of benign stuff, like the oncologist said, chemo that's not really probably going to do anything anyway, right? Except it would bother the rest of him. So, and my experience with benign mature replicating cells is they just, because of their biology, they don't seem to respond to the same stuff that cancer cells would respond to anyway. So the normal thing to do is you can try, and kick up some anti-cell replication, strategies, and see if that indeed does anything. I'm guessing because there was a change, they're going to want to do his imaging again sooner, or
we're going to talk about that after the I mean, either way, it's going to be minimum another MRI at like 3 months instead of 6 months or a year that we've been doing. And if the HVA-VMA came back super high, then he would probably be pressing for a maybe an MIBG scan, immediately after that, just to kind of get that activity level. And I'm not, obviously we've avoided an MIBG or PET scan for a long time for obvious, non-toxic reasons. I don't know how I'd feel about that if that was the case, but either way, it'll be an MRI in a few months. Because it's not an issue now, but if it continues to get bigger, even though it's outside the spine, obviously, at some point it does become an issue.
Right. Yeah. So, I guess that's probably the first, other than prepping him for the VMA test, that's probably the first order of business, is figuring out which it's most likely to be.
So, and that being said, I was, because when I talked to him, he was saying that, if we see a spike on the VMA, then, that'll give us more activity level for suggesting active cancer. But then I was just looking into ganglioneuroma the other day, and I saw something about they test for HVA-VMA for ganglioneuroma as well. Do you have any thoughts on that offhand? I haven't talked to him about it.
It's my understanding is, though, it's sort of, the levels look very different. Like an active neuroblastoma or something like that is going to have like super high
more
level
of a spike, whereas maybe
the other is going to be just a
slightly
bump.
elevated.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think they can, I think they can kind of tell by degree, really.
Yeah. Okay.
But kind of like the imaging, it's not exactly an exact science, but I think it's different enough that they can say, oh, it's 90% this or 99% this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I really think that's the first order of business. And then, like you said, I actually think regardless of which one it is, but especially if it's the more active tumor, going back to as many direct anti-cancer strategies as possible, probably rotating some of them. The the idea of adding ozone. He's never had that before.
Mm-mm.
Okay. With those sorts of with the neurological tumors, they do seem to be sensitive to a couple things. One is oxidative therapies, which ozone would qualify for. The other, depending on how this comes out, there's probably a couple of other possibilities too that you could do some additional metabolic type therapies on top of his diet. The other stuff that you're manipulating there. Because it seems with these, and this is whether adults or kids, but when they get these neurological tumor cells that like to divide rapidly, you kind of have to hit them from two different points. So oxidative damage is one big point, which they seem to be sensitive to usually, and the other would be really forcing them into metabolism that's just not friendly to their cell type. But on the other side of the coin, if it's a ganglioneuroma, it's sort of different calculus, really. I mean, it's going to be different approach.
So when you say force, like metabolic therapy, forcing them into a different metabolism, are we talking about like a period of ketosis, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think at the base, the big sketch outline would be nutritional ketosis, added ketone salts to push his ketone levels higher, and then probably if that's what you're going to do, then there's a couple of things you can add on to that would be very helpful. Now, interestingly, so the oncologist mentioned Accutane or retinoids. In metabolic therapies, the retinoids are implicitly important. You don't have to use Accutane, however. So the studies are done on Accutane because A, it's a drug, and B, that's what they know to do studies on. There are natural retinoids that we use with our metabolic therapies that we can figure out the kid dose for, but we've used them in children with pretty aggressive cancers, and they're very safe, but they're also from the tumor biologists that we worked with to come up with the idea to add them in. When they first started using them in animals, when they took the retinoids out, the other therapies just sort of fell apart, or they don't work as well. So retinoids do seem to be a big part of it. But if it was my kid, I wouldn't use Accutane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you say natural, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is always like vitamin A, carrot juice or something like that. Are you talking about more of like a supplement type thing, or?
You can't get it from carrot juice because those are carotenoids and they just won't convert.
Oh, that's not the
high
same
enough.
thing. Yeah, it's not the same
So
thing.
your body will make some, but this is more of like a therapeutic dose of like retinol palmitate, which is it's a supplement, but there's basically retinol palmitate's the easiest supplement form to get, and that's what we normally dose with these things.
Yeah.
I mean the carotenoids don't hurt anything, but they don't convert fast enough to have like a tumor effect. So yeah. So on top of that, you'd be giving him some retinol palmitate. And nice thing with kids is it comes in drops and it's easy to the dose is easy to figure out.
Yeah. And so this would be, that's if it was like an active.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's a curious idea. If it's a ganglioneuroma and there's a little bit of data about Accutane, it would be a curious idea to just see if a natural retinoid would help along the way, because it won't hurt Ryder if it's dosed correctly. But I think ganglioneuromas don't respond to very much, and so if they did respond to Accutane, I mean, it's worth trying that.
Yeah.
The other thing too is those benign embryonic tumors like that don't respond to chemo and other stuff. The only other strategy I've seen is more of the like immunomodulatory things that would keep the cell division triggers, regulated. I mean, you can't stop them, but we keep them more regulated. And so in addition to like a retinoid, like a supplement retinol, um, uh, higher doses of some of the mushroom therapies would be something that may fit in there. Rotating curcuminoids, the kind of rotating these immune modulators would be something. It'd be worth trying, and wouldn't hurt anything. And it also wouldn't hurt the sleeping other tumor. So if it's not a ganglioneuroma and it's active, then I think getting him into ketosis and boosting his ketones with exogenous like ketone salt can be very helpful as a base. And what we actually found was we do this a lot with adult brain tumors, and we do it a lot with adult and child like leukemias and lymphomas. So those areas we have most experience. And across the board, if the dietary ketosis, or at least close to dietary ketosis and then added ketones, if you don't have that part, the other therapies kind of work and then they kind of bounce off after a while, because it seems that the tumor biology has to be sort of held in check by the ketones. And if that doesn't happen, then the other therapies, it's sort of like the tumor figures out a way around the other therapies. So if it's an active tumor, that would be the direction I would go.
So, so on like ketosis, I mean, it seems like it's like in direct opposition to all like the storied Gerson therapy-esque juicing, lots of fruits and vegetables, that there's certainly and I'm not talking about like any one specific cancer, but there's obviously a whole lot of people that have taken that route and, have done okay over the years. I hear more about keto in the more recent years than in years past. I mean, it's like almost like a podcast topic, but I mean, I don't know, like,
yeah,
like just in general. And that's kind of my one thing is like, I've always said to myself, like, ketosis seems like like a valid intervention, but not necessarily like if you're addicted to ketosis, so to speak, then you haven't really cured anything. I mean, so if you were to, recommend or whatever that Ryder were to go on a ketosis, would this be like for a, some sort of limited time intervention sort of thing, or would it be like more of a long-term thing? And then what's your thoughts on what I said on just the more, kind of general principle keto versus Gerson sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, I think I'll summarize the points probably, because it's a pretty deep well. The first thing is, most people, including people who promote ketosis, don't understand it and also don't know how to do it. So one of the things that people need to know is there are vegan ketosis diet plans. There are vegetarian ketosis diet plans. There's all sorts of things that aren't eating bacon all day. So it's sort of like you can make a ketone-based diet super unhealthy or super healthy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of vegetable material that can be in a ketogenic diet. And when, gosh, it was almost a year ago now when we did that metabolic cancer therapy series with Dominic D'Agostino, who does a lot of that research. That was one of the things that he tried to bring out was most of the American kind of ketosis promoting folks, they really don't, they don't calculate things in a way that allows them to put healthy food in. So I think there's ways to do it, and it's just a very, very American way that we do everything, I suppose. So there's ways to do it that have a lot of very useful nutrients, et cetera. So you don't have to do it stupidly. What I will say, and I'm publishing a paper they've sent it back 3 times, and I think they finally like all the way it's written now, but it's a case series, and it includes children and adults, and a portion of them are neurological tumors. And these are people that had not responded to, so the cancer had finally outpaced every other therapy they were doing. And other than the metabolic therapies that don't involve ketosis, which was a big part of what we were doing, getting people near ketosis and or close and then using exogenous ketones was the only unifying part of the people who lived. The people that refused to change their diet in that direction, they would stick for a while and then they wouldn't. And I've seen with people say, I'm not, just because you brought Gerson up, it's on my mind, but I'm not necessarily picking on Gerson specifically. Yeah. I have seen people who respond to that sort of treatment and then they stop responding. And part of it, there's just a lot of reasons for that, but part of it is that their metabolism becomes very friendly to the cancer, even though that all the other micronutrients are sort of anti the cancer. And so we've had people that were doing that, and then when they sort of fall out of remission or whatever, the only thing I've ever found on the diet side that changes that is a ketogenic approach. So kind of like I think you said this, I do see it as it's an interventional therapy. I think, being in ketosis is an interventional therapy, whether you're doing it, let's say, because you have diabetes or cancer or whatever. So it is a pretty big hammer. But that being said, in cases where things start to get out of control, and if you look at the tumor biology of what it does, it's one of the only things that can keep the tumor cells from outsmarting every other therapy that you're doing. And obviously, if someone's in remission and they're in a stable remission, we will move them sort of broader and broader, sort of to a, not a stupid diet, obviously, but, like more and more vegetables and all that stuff, and just kind of watch them and see kind of where it's going. But something that we see is if you do it right, you can have a fairly large amount of vegetable type material that is non-insulinogenic and will keep you there. And then if you do that and you do the exogenous ketones just to kind of keep the blood level stable, it's really quite effective. So yeah, I think, and we've seen it with, we have a case right now that I'm collaborating on with some other doctors, and it's a pancreatic cancer case, and the oncologist gave him about a 3 or 4% chance that surgery and chemo would do anything, and they said, we wouldn't do it if it was us. And doing keto and a metabolic therapy approach with it, but mostly keto in the induction, he went into remission in like 12 weeks, which you don't see with pancreatic cancer very often. So it's It sounds weird, and the way Americans do it for the most part sounds super unhealthy because they do it super unhealthy, but it doesn't have to be that way, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's, what I always figured is if I ever did do something like that, it would be be getting a lot of greens powders and all that sort of stuff. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if you think about it, like dark greens and in a lot of the plant kingdom that has a lot of those dark flavonoids, they don't have a lot of sugar in them. They're mostly fiber and long chains of carbohydrate that aren't going to break down and make you release insulin anyway. And so you can get a lot of dense nutrition without spiking your insulin. So
Yeah.
that's just, it's a different way of sort of putting together what you eat.
And so it would be for some sort of, would it be like a continual ketosis for some amount of days, weeks, months, or would it be like, some sort of like rotation type thing, or?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things. Usually if there's a short time period between the scan A and scan B, if there's something they're scanning, what we'll do, let's say it's a 3 months, so it's reasonably short. What we will do is do it pretty regular through that time period, then with other things to augment it, and then get the next scan. If the next scan says things have shrunk, everything's quiet, etc., normally at that point, if they've done a shorter, like a 3-month scan window, they'll say, okay, great, it looks like it's all gone to sleep again, but they're probably going to scan again in 3 or 6 months on the other side.
Yeah.
So then what we do in the second phase, in the 3 to 6 months, is people can become keto adapted, so that you can start to cycle in different, you can do what they call carb cycling and have days off and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, with the addition of just ketone as a supplement, a ketone salt, we, in phase 2, between the next scans, we usually allow people more variety. And it still has to be a diet that doesn't spike a lot of insulin. So like if you're juicing, the juices are more on the vegetable side and, less of the other stuff. But there's more variety during that time period. And then the proof is, well, if you're still in remission on scan 3, then it's a matter of, kind of what it takes to keep you there, which maintenance can be a lot easier, But I think in the first 3 months, it's more of like, it's like an actual biochemical intervention change you're trying to do to like get the system's attention and stop it from doing what it's doing. And that seems to be the most intense time.
What about the fact, or I think it's a fact, that cancer cells can still ferment glutamine, and glutamine is pretty widely available in the body?
Yeah, that is a fact. And the only time glutamine is not a problem for tumor cells is when you're in ketosis.
Oh, so they cannot ferment it when you're in ketosis?
Yeah, because so this is a very long discussion, but I wrote a review on it that people get confused over. So glutaminolysis is where the tumor cell is doing its weird tumor biology thing, and it goes after any source it can get. So sugar is one of its big sources, and then it does this thing where it has lactate efflux. So it pumps out lactate, and when it pumps out lactate, it triggers the glutamine. So it's like lactate goes out and glutamine goes in, and then it breaks the glutamine down. When you're in ketosis, you're blocking a part of that system that is the acidotic part of the system that does the lactate efflux. Now, this is why the diet is a big thing. There's other stuff to slow the lactate efflux down as well. So there's other things you do. But if you can shut that down, the other end of the spectrum, so you got like ketosis on one end that actually shuts down most of the triggering of glutamine going back in. On the other end of the spectrum, let's say it's a standard American high sugar diet. That not only, of course, triggers the tumor cells to go into their anaerobic metabolism and love it and all that stuff, but because it primes the lactate pump so much, it's like that's when glutamine is super dangerous. So what we normally talk is we use glutamine for GI repair after chemo and stuff like that. But what we tell people is, glutamine is really useful, but it can be cancer food if you have a high insulinogenic, high sugar diet. So it's sort of like they don't go together very well. Yeah.
Okay. And could you just rattle off like the other, when you say keto plus other metabolic therapies, could you just rattle what those therapies, typically are off, just so I know I'm not missing anything?
Yeah. So one of them is a prescription item that if, and I've been drawing pictures with my fingers, it doesn't work really well on the screen, I'm sure, but if it will work with me here. So let's say my finger down this way. This is, the use of glucose and all that stuff. And then it gets stuck here. Normal cells can go here and burn it. Cancer cells don't burn it well. So then it goes into lactate production, and that's what goes out and promotes tumor development and other stuff in this glutamine business. One of the things that you have to do is do something to stop the tumor cell from this part here. So ketogenesis slows it way down, like because you're actually using another fuel source over here. So that slows it down. But there's actually things that stop or slow down the enzymes that do the rest of it. So one of the things we use there is something called DCA, dichloroacetate, which is an old drug that was used for acidosis, and that's what it shut down. Well, it's used in cancer for this purpose. Now, 10 years ago when I was using it, it wasn't working really well, and one of the reasons we found out was we weren't changing people's diets, and that's a huge thing. Because if you're still priming the system really heavily, it's good, but it's not that good. There's two other drugs that aren't available in the US that are used for this that are very powerful. One is called 2-deoxyglucose, and the other is 3-bromopyruvate. And interestingly, 3-bromopyruvate is an approved drug in Mexico for chemotherapy, and you can't get it down there. I work down there, and I've been trying to get it. You can't get it. So the one we have available is DCA. But what we found is the DCA does this one biologic part. The ketogenesis sort of backs it up by starving the system and slowing it down. And then you have to do things that synergize the DCA. Otherwise, that's the second thing we found was diet super important, number one, and then DCA can't pull all the weight on its own. So what we found was there's different strategies. There's like, in North America, there's like 3 or 4 of us who have experimented with different stuff with DCA in humans anyway, and cancer. And we tried a little of everything. And there used to be these weird mixtures of B1 and alpha lipoic acid and all this other stuff that we would use. What we found in this case series I'm publishing is that the DCA works reasonably well. If we do the diet, it makes the DCA actually have a chance. And then to synergize it, you have to synergize kind of down at this part of the cell here where the mitochondria are. And if you can make the DCA work better at lower doses, because DCA has a little toxicity to it, and then you can make the mitochondria be forced to work in a tumor cell, the tumor cell can't handle that, and it becomes very unstable. And it's likely to draw the attention of the immune system, or it's likely to actually just die. And so what we found that did those 3 things, the synergy and then protection and, lower doses and then the mito thing, was a relative of alpha lipoic acid called poly-MBA. and we use that for that. Again, with poly-MVA, we started using that probably 10 years ago too, and on its own, in some cancers, it does stuff. It's more of it really works better as a synergist, though.
Yeah.
So it was when we got all those things together, and actually, this is where the vitamin A, like the retinol, this is one piece of the puzzle where it's actually a synergist at this junction here, which is probably why Accutane does what it does too, although in a more toxic way. So in those people, in the cases that I'm publishing, once we got all of those things together, it actually, those are the people that lived, and the cancers, some of them stopped growing, and some way slowed down. Sorry about the sirens outside there. They'll go away. So anyway, it's I think the punchline of metabolic therapies is they've done more with cancers that get out of control than anything else I've seen, but you have to kind of think of it as there's just this kind of microcosm of the tumor cell, and if you just shut one thing down, it finds 8 other ways to be active and nasty. And that's probably why the synergy is so important.
Yeah. Okay. And again, this is all in the context of if it were an active cancer versus the ganglioneuroma, all this stuff,
totally different.
Metabolic stuff wouldn't make much of a difference on a ganglioneuroma.
I would doubt that the metabolic thing would do much with a mature cell thing like a ganglioneuroma. Totally different biology. Yeah.
So I mean, if it were a ganglioneuroma, it would be immune modulating, possibly couldn't hurt doing some the retinoid stuff.
Yeah.
And other than that, if it kept growing, we'd probably just have to cut it out or something. I mean, would there be anything that you
I mean, it based on what I've seen with them, and kind of based on the response of the oncologist saying, there's probably not much standard therapy is going to do. I don't think there's anything other than debulking it surgically that they would do down the road.
Yeah.
I mean, those can get pretty big, but also it depends how fast they're growing. And that's where I think like retinoid and immune modulation would probably at least slow it down, so there's not this big trigger for it to be growing.
And like what would I don't know, it's kind of weird, like what would the cause of, like why would these cancer cells, like is there something like not healed and that's why they didn't just go away entirely but changed into mature cells that are still hanging around? Is it just a matter of happenstance?
Yeah, like with the ganglioneuroma cells.
Yeah, if it was to be, a neuroblastoma that had now morphed into a ganglioneuroma that was mature and not really, malignant, but still hanging around all the same.
Right.
Like there's something that just, needs to be fixed there, like with the whole body, you know what I mean? Like,
I think that the idea there is probably that because though, if you think of it this way, those cells have been there, since he was an embryo, and they get triggered to be where they're not supposed to be, and also probably that's part of the trigger for them to grow the way that they do. Usually that's like, it's like taking anything and putting it in the wrong place. It gets like the signals are all mixed up. It doesn't do the right thing. And so what would normally be helpful for it is somewhat helpful, but it doesn't like make it go away. And this is maybe a strange analogy, but other normal cells that do this would be like endometriosis, where the endometrium is supposed to be in the uterus and then it goes elsewhere. Well, when it's elsewhere, it's not supposed to be there, and so it does really bizarre stuff. And it's responsive to things that calm endometrium down, but it still is very symptomatic because it's sitting, in your abdomen or something like that. I think with these sort of embryonic cells that like to do this stuff, they are now sitting and they're being cells. They're just, they're dividing and doing what they do. They just aren't even supposed to be there.
Yeah.
So I think the cause end of it, and this is sort of an unanswerable question, but the cause end of it is if they don't ever get into the wrong space when you're an embryo or a fetus, then you don't have these problems. So whatever the dysfunction is starts way back there, and then they're just acting like cells and trying to live, and I mean they're just in the wrong place and they're doing the best they can. I think that's really what goes on.
Yeah. Okay. Okie doke. Any like neuroblastoma specific stuff? I mean, obviously I've done a ton of research on it, but I mean, I know you've seen other neuroblastoma kids, just as far as like the anti-cancer nutrients and stuff like that come to mind.
I'm assuming you probably have tried almost everything or everything you've read about. Honestly, the one thing on the nutrient side, even though it's a little more of, it's sort of on the border of pharmacologic nutrient intervention, on its own, like retinol palmitate as the fat soluble kind of vitamin A dosed appropriately, on its own, that can make quite a bit of difference. And so that's one thing. The other would be, let's say, and you might already be doing this, but as a synergist with that, one of the lipoic acid forms would probably synergize the retinols. And I don't know if you've given him any like ALA or any of those sort of things in the past.
We have in the past, but it's been a long time.
Yeah, and I mean it's the only, like, we use that a lot with detoxing after scans and stuff like that. It's sort of like NAC, it's a relative thiol. But longer term, and again at a child appropriate dose, the ALA, because it works kind of where I was saying in the mitochondrial area, and it kind of forces metabolism in your normal cells in a happy way, but in a tumor cell it forces metabolism in an area they don't like metabolizing. That and the retinoids on a nutritional approach I've seen be very helpful too, as it kind of an add-on. So that would be something to consider. And all the stuff we talked about with a metabolic kind of circle around the tumor metabolic approach is another. The other, just while we're in the neighborhood, one thing we've used, so there's a lot of research you see with synergizing metabolic therapies with the diabetes drug metformin and other ones, but the plant berberine does really similar things to metformin, and they even use it in diabetes and stuff. But we actually use berberine a lot in cancers to support to support the metabolism angle. And that and the ALA and the retinoids all kind of swim in the same direction. And berberines are very safe, kids. So that's a non-nutrient but non-drug thing that can be pretty useful sometimes.
Oh, and on is DCA, I forget if you said, is that a pure prescription thing, or is it can you just order DCA? And then second question is, I know DCA, both DCA and poly-MVA are injectable also, and I know poly-MVA also is obviously, oral as well. I mean, would in the optimal situation, would both of those be in like intravenous? And I guess secondary question is DCA over the counter, or do I need to get somebody to get a prescription for that?
So without getting myself in trouble, let's see. I have seen, so this is not me making, this is just something I've seen from actually the guys at the hospital in Mexico found it and asked me about it. So I just saw what they showed me. I have seen supplements that have DCA in them. and it is absorbed really well orally.
Yeah.
So based on what I've seen on the internet, I believe they are available. It is the kind of thing where you want to see some quality control for it, because anyone could say they're making, or giving you something. But that being said, I have seen it, so I can say that much. Now, interestingly, on the poly DCA combo, and of course we were getting it from pharmacies and stuff, but in the case series, we had some people who live far away, and so they couldn't do IVs. And some of them did just as well using the oral version and the oral doses of both. And so what that said to me was it's probably almost equally effective orally as it would be injectably. The only one where and this doesn't, other than this is a child, but it doesn't translate to different tumor type. We had a super genetically aggressive childhood leukemia case, and it was like nothing was stopping it. It was just going crazy ballistic, as they do. And the only thing that stopped it was when we did, injections of those things along with the diet and the other stuff. And that probably is because it's a blood cancer and it had to get to the bone marrow, as opposed to something that's localized where you can kind of just keep stuff orally going in towards it, calming it down. And this is even like in some of the people who live far away and only could do oral, we had an adult that had this giant lymphoma that the oncologist basically said, you're too far away from treatment to do anything, go and pass away. And his lymphoma shrunk in 3 months, just doing the oral version of what we're talking about, like 60-70%. The oncologist was blown away. And that he's still alive 6 years later. And he was supposed to be dead in 3 months or something. So I've seen it do really amazing things orally, and it's probably because they absorb really well, Yeah. And if it's not like a wildfire leukemia in a kid or something like that, probably orally is fine.
Much appreciated. That's probably good for now then.
Yeah, I will just say on the DCA side of things, so this is a matter of public record. I testified on behalf of the FDA of DCA and a bunch of other of these sorts of things we're talking about, to keep it available so that compounding pharmacies could make it for doctors in a safe and quality controlled manner. And the FDA actually, the committee said, well, we don't think it's safe and all. It's a drug that's been around forever, and there's a lot of research on it actually going on right now. And we were doing research with our people, and of interest. And so they said this, and they kind of voted against it, but they've not enacted any of this stuff that they voted against. So it's in limbo right now. You can still get it from pharmacies. But after that, what I noticed, I was doing research on it. DCA has been licensed to, I think, 1 or 2 big pharmaceutical companies for use alongside of standard chemotherapy, because what they see is it actually makes the chemo work better. So DCA will be available as a chemotherapy drug adjunct for a way lot of money. And what the purpose of this is to take it out of the hands of anybody except the chemotherapy industry. So
they can charge a little more for it.
They're going to charge a lot more for it. I promise you, it's not going to be cheap. So on the point that DCA actually does make a difference in cancer, it's good enough that they're actually adding it in. It's sort of like they've done this with curcumin. Now there's now a curcumin drug, and it's a chemotherapy drug, and it's not going to be as cheap as curcumin. I can promise you that. So we got that going on. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
All right, Dr. Anderson, appreciate the time.
Thanks again, and let me know how the scan and the VMA test, all that business goes, okay?
Yeah.
All right.
All right, so there you have it. That was a full-fledged consultation call with arguably the leading naturopathic oncologist in the country, and I hope it gave you some good things to think about and apply to your own story. So now that you heard that call, not knowing whether Ryder's HVA, MVA results were going to indicate a reactivation or mature cells, I will now tell you that those levels were actually well within normal range and actually even lower than the last time we took them. So that would indeed indicate that it is mature cells that we're dealing with that are just sort of hanging around and not going away, but not acting as malignant cancer cells either. So, with all that being said, the plan going forward for us is to do the deep healing work you heard me mention early on to Dr. A. We're analyzing his genetics, his metabolic function, his gut, toxicity levels, working on him energetically and so on, in hopes that optimizing him down to the cellular and energetic level will help the situation correct itself, in addition to looking for more information on what we can do to target these mature cells specifically. And we're going to be documenting as many of these conversations and sessions, etc., as possible, either in the form of a podcast interview that makes it onto this show or more edited, produced content videos that you'll probably only see on the Stern Method YouTube channel or website. So there you have it. And again, we will still have the regular interviews that don't necessarily pertain 100% to Ryder, because this is really the only show of its kind studying all ways of reducing cancer, and we want it to remain as helpful as possible to as many of you as we can. You can find links to all resources that Dr. Anderson mentioned on the show today, all the supplements and studies he mentioned, etc., at thesternmethod.com/Paul Anderson Consult, with dashes in between the words after the slash. So again, that's thesternmethod.com/Paul Anderson Consult. As always, music was provided by the Fat Rat and Tasty Network, and all production and editing was done by my wife and partner in so many ways, Teddy Sternagel. This is Ryan Sternagel letting you know that if you are going through cancer, to just keep going. That's all for now. God bless and Godspeed.